Ladies and gentlemen, this is the one you guys have been waiting for, because in my hands we have a brand new RX 9070 XT, the graphics card that aims to pretty much crush everything when it comes to value for 1440p and 4K gaming. It's going to be awesome for maximizing bang for buck. It can do ray tracing. It has brand new FSR4. I'm really excited. I think you're really excited about it. And what I wanted to do here today was pretty much look to build a dream price to performance gaming PC. So everything that we have on our desk is actually geared towards price to performance, to saving you money. And in this video, proudly sponsored by Asus and AMD, we're going to show you how to make it happen. And of course, at the end of the video, we're going to show you exactly how this thing performs as well, so you can see exactly just how good the RX 9070 XT is, and ultimately whether you want to do what I'm doing right now and pick one up. So yes, today we are very much going for the dream price to performance Team Red build. It all starts with this. This is the Prime Asus RX 9070 XT, and this is actually meant to be an MSRP SKU. Hopefully you can get it for that.
Hi guys, Editor Carl quickly jumping in. So this was filmed before the recent pricing changes. When Marcus agreed to make this video, this was the price we were told in an email from Asus. 4 days later, we got another email with this attachment showing the price at just under £636 in the UK. So whenever Marcus mentions MSRP or pricing, just remember that this was filmed before that change. Marcus is actually currently down under, having a whale of a time in Australia, otherwise he would have amended this himself. Here he is by a bridge. Here's an opera house, and here's some strange looking dogs. Anyway, enjoy the video. Just be aware this was filmed before the pricing changes and before Marcus left the country. Bye!
Let's open up our box, shall we, and actually see what we have on offer. And this being a Prime card, it's all about price to performance, obviously like the rest of this rig. It's really quite attractive actually, but it's not as large as some other cards, which personally I quite like. Obviously you can get even better thermals and acoustics if you go for like a higher SKU, but it's not really what I'd recommend, personally speaking. It depends obviously on the exact card and what it is that you're after and what the airflow of your case and things are like. But personally speaking, I typically would go for a more MSRP SKU myself. This one is an OC edition. It does actually have 3 8-pins on the top, so obviously make sure you have a decent power supply to pair with this. But you do also have this little cutout. It's got like a pass-through design as well, which obviously helps with thermals and acoustics. And then you do have a couple of different modes. So you've got your performance and your quiet, and this also doubles as a dual BIOS switch essentially. So if you ever had any issues, as unluckily as it is, then you could swap to the other one and it would mean you wouldn't have to send the card back, which is quite nice. And then you do have DisplayPort 2.1 Type A and HDMI 2.1 on the side of this as well. Let's pop this to one side for a second though and actually press on to the rest of our build, because obviously a gaming PC is not going to build itself. That's why I'm here. And we have a brand new motherboard as well from Asus TUF. This is the B850 plus Wi-Fi. Again, all about price to performance. Doesn't have the same bandwidth as like X870E, but again, for a gaming PC, you don't really need it, to be honest with you. So this is more than sufficient. And I must say that I really do like what Asus have been doing with their TUF boards recently, because I hate to say it, but cheaper motherboards tend to often look cheaper, whereas TUF pretty much always seems to nail price to performance, and they still have a board that you're kind of really proud to have and show off in your system, especially obviously if you're going for the black theme. I mean, if you're going for like an all-white system, maybe this isn't the right pick. This particular board actually comes with Wi-Fi 7 support though, which is nice. Loads of USB, and it does also support USB burst flashback, so if you're buying this with an unreleased but compatible AM5 CPU, then you can actually update this motherboard without needing an old chip in order to do it, which is always a nice touch. But let's now get our PC building party on the road, shall we, and actually start building our system. Now, in case you're a newbie, quick cheat sheet, make sure you do it on top of your motherboard box. It makes it a lot easier. You've got light, you can see what you're doing, you can reach around, very useful. This is where your CPU is going to go. You have your RAM slots here. Now, Asus have made this very simple and straightforward for you by actually labeling them with this gray color, because you want to use slots 2 and 4. If you use the others, you're not either going to get the full bandwidth, or it's not going to be optimized if you just put it in 1 and 3. It will still work almost certainly very similarly, but again, not optimized, so use these 2 gray ones. This is where your SSD storage is going to go in these little heat sinks here. In order to power your system, you need to use this 24-pin ATX here, and then at least one of these 8 pins at the top left-hand corner. If you do have the capability, plug both of them in. It looks neater, and you're getting the best power delivery essentially, but it's not actually necessary, depending on the CPU, to plug both of these in if you don't have all of the connections. We do have our fan headers here. These actually obviously control the fans that you have on your case and any CPU coolers that you might have. If you don't plug your CPU cooler fan header in, then you'll get a warning. Your PC probably won't boot to protect itself. And obviously Obviously, if you don't plug the fans in, then bits will overheat, which is bad. Don't do that. These are our addressable RGB headers. Usually plug these in at the same time as the fans, because obviously the fans have RGB. You've got two up here, and then another one down here at the bottom. This connection here is for your front panel. It's usually pretty straightforward in most cases now, as it comes as a single block. But on some of them, it can be like tiny little connections, so you've got to make sure you plug them the right way. This essentially makes your power button actually do anything. If you don't plug this in, then your system won't boot, and it's a common cause of PCs not starting. We also have our USB. This is for the USB-C, this is for USB 3, and then down the bottom, any USB 2 devices or older cases will use these. Obviously, the speed varies depending on the device that you're plugging in. If you're using any older SSDs, you probably want to use the SATA port on the right-hand side, and it's interesting to see these dwindle over time. This only has 2 because that bandwidth is going to other more up-to-date bits of the board. And then we do have our HD audio for the front panel, and then we also have some extra fan headers, again, if you're plugging in extra fans. At this stage then, you should now be a motherboard expert and ready to actually install your chip. And the one we're using here, I think, is going to be the right choice for most people. This is the Ryzen 7 9700X, and if you want even better bang for buck and you're happy to go for the previous generation and get something in a sale, then you could go for the Ryzen 7700, but in certain games I think you will start to see a bit of CPU bottlenecking. So if you step up to this, you are going to get better performance. Now obviously the elephant in the room is the people saying, well, why don't you go for the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D? That's the fastest gaming CPU. Isn't that going to make more sense? And the answer is yes, if you're happy to spend more. It is very easy to recommend. But as I say, the whole point of this system is to try and get you the best bang for buck, really, possible at the high end. And if you're going to spend, especially in the US, quite a lot more on that chip, you do get more performance, but you don't necessarily get better bang for the buck. With that installed, we can then press on to our memory, or our RAM, and this is a 6000 megahertz kit, 32 gigabytes, CL30. This is actually XMP, but I'd recommend, and I will link along with everything else featured actually, all of the components, current pricing, always linked down below. I would recommend an Expo kit, but I kind of use this just to demonstrate that XMP is fine as well. So if you can get it at a lower price, by all means go for it, but Expo is optimized for AMD, so you're more likely to have better success when it comes to RAM overclocking. So that means you've got to turn on the XMP or the Expo profile in the motherboard BIOS, but I will show you how to do that when we get there, don't worry. He lines up the perfect shot. It was nowhere near. It was a disaster. Unlike the current pricing on this SSD.
Terrible segue, but we're going to use it anyway.
This is the KT3000 SSD from Kingston, and I've been using this for almost a couple of years, I think now. It's not a new drive per se, it's PCI Generation 4, but read-write speeds on this are very, very strong, and it does also have a DRAM cache as well. So the performance on this is going to be great, but the price isn't really that different to more cheaper drives, to be honest. You can buy a terabyte version of this just under £80 here in the UK, and the 2 terabyte drives are around about £130. So I think that's very good value, especially if you have slower internet speed. I think actually that's going to be the determining factor for a lot of people. If you've got fast internet, you can get away with a terabyte if you want to save money. If you've got slow internet and you want to have loads of games on your system, upgrade to 2. But you just want to remove this little heatsink and then take away that little film, drop your SSD into position, and then replace the heatsink and screw it back down. With that out of the way, we are pretty much... I was so worried that was going to fall off the desk then. That's not sensible. Don't slide it, Marcus. How many times? Now that that's out of the way, I do want to talk about the cooler, because it's not necessary to do this now, but I always want to check the mounting before we put our motherboard inside our case, just because it makes everything easier essentially. And this is a slightly smaller version of the LC360 ARGB Prime that we tested last year that I really liked actually, mainly just because it's pre-installed. You know me.
Usually I hate radiators.
Whereas this was, radiators are okay. And it's weird seeing a 240. We don't use them that much anymore, whereas back in the day, these used to be all of the rage. A 360 was madness.
This is madness.
But look, pre-assembled for you. You don't have to muck about with the fans, as long, obviously, as the orientation of this is correct, so it's blowing through into the all-in-one, which is nice. But it does look like there is a slight modification to make to our board, so we just want to take these 4 silver screws out. Don't worry, this is very normal and by design. This is called the default AM5 mounting hardware. Then you want to pick up your AM5 screws from the cooler box, and then just put these in those holes. And then once you've done all 4, you are now ready to actually... Don't slide it, don't slide it. We are now ready to actually start building our system for real. This is a ProArt case actually. That's why this is called the PA401. Left the box there so I could see the name, because I knew I would forget that. It's not the most catchy name in the world, but I mean, does it matter? And I've got to say actually that this is something that's quite refreshing because look at the size of it. This is a higher end price to performance chassis, but one that's not massive. I mean, it's the footprint really, it's the depth. You can see this is gonna look just as good like on someone's desk, built up with a full gaming PC as it is as a workstation like under your desk or something. So I like what they've done, but let's open this up with those little tabs actually to get that. That's a really nice mechanism. And have a look what we have inside. So we've got a couple of very large fans actually on the front. They look like 160s to me. Obviously you'll put your motherboard here. There's not actually a load of mesh or something down the bottom. You'll find that in a lot of cases these days, but I don't actually think it makes that much difference, to be honest, and it is going to hide your cables. I like the fact that you do have this hole here as well, so your graphics card cable can go up through that. So many cases don't do it, really frustrates me. But let's give this a spin round. We'll show you that there is some cable management here. And sponsored video or not, Asus, I am going to moan. I don't really understand. You've got this cool little lock here, so you can't take the side panel off by accident, essentially. But then that doesn't apply to this one. I mean, they've done a good job on the actual side panel though, because that's nice and strong, doesn't really warp or anything when you move it, which is always good to see. And then in terms of cable management and things, I mean, it's a little bit basic, but it's got everything that you need. Your main cable management channels are here, room for SSDs and things. I think this is going to work quite nicely. Only extra things I'd like to see maybe be some extra hooks here, kind of like the ones you've got on the back, but on the inside, I think that'd be useful. I assume the front panel, yeah, literally just pulls away as well. And you do have a dust filter in there. Quick shout out, by the way, to say that if you do want to go for this in a wood finish, you can actually get one where the front panel is wood, which is nice. But let's drop this down on top of our desk. We'll get our little accessories box that actually comes at the top of the box. We can then grab our board, line this up, look, with the hole at the back. You want to kind of get this standoff to cling onto your board, look. Then just use the screws included with your case to get this secure. And then we can install our cooler by taking off this little top piece with the tab. I was going to say it doesn't look like your radiator bracket removes, but actually look, they've been very clever. And just like that, here we have our rad bracket. Then get your bracket and drop that on top. So just take the opportunity to get that screwed and fitted down. And then if you've done everything correctly, this should feed through at the top. Cable should be facing the back and it should literally just drop down into place and then screw back down. Grabbing hold of our cooler just to make sure it doesn't damage anything, let's flip this back on its side. Swap the default bracket for the AMD one, literally just by sliding that on, carefully removing this little plastic tab and exposing the thermal compound, and then literally just line up the screws with the holes and then use these spring nuts on top of the posts and then use a screwdriver in a cross pattern to get that fitted down. Let's not forget though that of course we do need to plug our cables in, so we've got our fan, our pump and our RGB. So let's start with the pump. There's this little port here called AIO pump, just slide that over the top. Next to that we have our CPU fan that we are of course going to use for these fans here. Then we also have our ARGB, and peeling off of that, we have this little extension that we can daisy chain with the pump. But let's now give this a spin round to the other side, shall we, and start to plug some of the cables in. But we do actually have this little fan hub here at the top. Please make sure you don't plug your cooler into this. I suppose you could get away with plugging in your cooler fans, but I highly would not recommend that. You want your motherboard to have full control over everything. Case fans, yes. Cooling, no, essentially. And then remember when we showed you the motherboard earlier? Well, now we've got our USB 3, USB-C, and then our HD audio and our front panel, look. And also the fan header for this hub. Once again, USB 3 is here, next to the USB-C. Front panel at the bottom right, our chassis fans, and then last but not least, our HD audio. And now that those are complete, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the most exciting bit, the graphics card. So first things first, let's take out these little slot covers on 2 and 3. And then we can once again return to the champ, the 9070 XT. And I must admit, this case suddenly looks a little bit on the smaller side. I hope this is actually going to fit. Surely Asus wouldn't send me stuff that doesn't. Oh, it's tight, look at that. I mean, does it actually fit? Yes. Yes, it does. But I mean, look at the clearance of that. It was like this was planned out, not by me. I can see why they didn't send me something higher up now, because that really wouldn't have fit in. I mean, for example, if you have the last gen 7900 XTX Tough Edition, you can see the problem. So actually, as we alluded to when we were talking about the graphics card in the intro, having something that is a little bit smaller definitely does have an advantage if you do want to use a smaller chassis, but that's probably quite obvious, isn't it? Use the same screws that you've just removed to get this fitted down. We'll pop the top back on as we are done up there. To get your power supply installed, it's actually pretty straightforward with this one. Just remove this little back plate. Then you can pick up your power supply, make sure the fan is facing downwards on this case, and then just put that on top. Then you just want to feed all of these cables through and pull your power supply into place and then fix it down. And then I'm sure this is the bit that probably feels quite intimidating now when you have a load of cables and things dangling down, but they are actually all labeled and there's not really many places you can put them that aren't the right place. So just go slowly, follow the instructions, you'll be fine. So you've got 2 for your CPU. These will need to go up here. This absolutely ginormous 24-pin ATX just tucks around the side like this. Our SATA connection, look, we can actually connect now, which is for the fan hub. It's this little port here. So let's use some of that cable management and get that connected. And then of course, last but certainly not least, we have our PCIe connections. We are going to have to daisy chain one of them, but doesn't really matter. Don't tell anyone. Not at this level anyway. Just feed those underneath and then pull them through the other side. And then it is literally just a case of plugging them in, not forgetting to plug in your CPU. And last but not least, our ATX. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, your gaming PC should be ready to go. Obviously, you will need to do a little bit of cable management around the back. As I say, just kind of like pleat those there, but the straps have taken everything else actually. And for a smaller size chassis, we've filled it. It looks good, it's dense, but it's not too much. Should we see if it works? I know that this is absolutely going to be a case of famous last words, but I'm not feeling too nervous. We've got it plugged in and we've got some RGB on the motherboard. But here's your moment of truth. We got some spinning, everyone. That's always a positive thing. Oh, I've not plugged the monitor in. Classic. Let's try again. Because if it doesn't boot or you've not plugged in the monitor and then you plug in your display port while it's doing the initial boot sequence, quite often you won't get a signal at all. So troubleshooting 101 there. Turn it off, turn it on again. That can clear some issues. Oh, it's doing something. I did suspect. So when you first use an AM5 motherboard, it does something that's called RAM training. And if you don't have, I don't want to say a compatible kit, but sometimes it takes quite a while for your first boot. It will not do this every time. Oh, that's amazing. I was getting worried then. I was getting worried, but we've done it. Restart your system and you should get this screen. It says we have our Ryzen 7 9700X and it has detected all of our RAM. Press F1 to go into the BIOS and it's a very simple change in order to get our RAM running at the full rated speed. It's this setting here called DOCP. If you had an Expo kit, I think this would say Expo rather than that. Turn that on and then here it says DDR5 6000. And then I also like to go and tune our fans or set up a custom curve. And if you haven't already got a copy of Windows on your SSD like I have, which chances are you won't, just go to the Microsoft website, like just type Windows 11 and then you can actually download the installer onto an existing PC. It goes onto a USB flash drive, you whack this in the back of your system and then your PC will automatically restart and you just follow the on-screen instructions in order to get Windows installed and then you'll be ready to go. So just give me a couple of hours to get all of the games that we need to test on here, get them updated, and we'll be right back. So then, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. And I'm pleased to say this is actually the first time that I have gamed on a 9070 XT, because when Carl did the benchmarking, We are also using one of ASUS's brand new monitors here. This is the PG27 UCDM, so this is a QD OLED monitor, 240Hz at 4K. But let's waste absolutely no more time and let's jump into the bit that really matters, which is the gaming performance. So what you're seeing here is probably the best example actually of a massive change with the new FSR4 technology. So this is enabled in the driver at the moment, but there will be games, there are some games like Call of Duty actually, if you can play Warzone for example, the latest one, you can actually turn on FSR4 in the game, but otherwise you go into the driver and as long as it is FSR 3.1 supported, you can do an override and then you can get FSR4 to just naturally work in your title. So what you're seeing here is absolute max settings, or at least the very high presets, and we're running this at 4K, but FSR is currently set to quality. So personally speaking, I would actually probably turn this down, especially on a 27-inch 4K monitor. Like, it's ridiculous. It may as well be native. You cannot really notice any artifacts, anything wrong with the image. If you look very carefully, you can see that there is a little bit around the character's head, but I mean, it is very, very minute, which when you compare it to the older generations of FSR, which definitely had their uses, but it's a night and day difference. This is a massive step forward, and I'm really, really pleased that AMD have done this. But we're looking at roughly 100 FPS or so. Obviously, it is going to vary depending on when and where you are in the title. I'm amazed as well that this isn't a ray trace title, because it looks so good, but this doesn't actually use ray tracing. So it does go to show that if the developers don't want to, you can get really good efficiency and still amazing visuals without it, which is pretty darn tasty. But let's see what happens if we go into our options menu. Look, there's our very high preset. We could turn these up to 16x, but very high, let's be honest, it's absolutely fine. But I want to go and find AMD FSR 3, and let's turn this down to performance. So obviously this is now going to render at a lower resolution, but then it's going to upscale that to the full 4K resolution that we have on our screen. And as you can see, your frame rate will increase quite dramatically actually, but this is a title that is very, very dependent on the CPU as well. So we are actually running into a little bit of a CPU bottleneck here. And the reason I want to bring this up is because when we spoke about this earlier and I said kind of like price to performance value, if you wanted to get a higher frame rate, then obviously you could go for that 9800X 3D. But my point is, if it's going to happen in games like this, when you're looking at around about 110 FPS or so, is that extra money worth it? That's not a question for me to answer, that's for you to answer. But clearly, if you do want to play Horizon Forbidden West and you want to get sky-high frame rates, this is going to be an awesome way to do it. And even with FSR 4 set to performance, you can still see you're getting a really lovely and very detailed image. I mean, let's have a quick look at this cutscene. Can you notice artifacting and moire and things? Like, if you look very carefully around edges, you might start to see it, but I can almost guarantee it's mainly going to be YouTube compression unless we kind of zoom in. It's much improved, and as you can see, I'm a very happy boy. But of course, I don't think it would be right to talk about ray tracing without talking about the title that made it a household gaming name, or a gaming household name. That being some Cyberpunk 2077, and what you're seeing now is 1440p Ultra ray tracing disabled, but FSR is currently set to quality. So this is running really well, and if you weren't fussed about that extra visual goodness from RT, then yes, you're going to be getting around about 75-80 FPS at 1440p. But there's been massive changes with this generation of AMD graphics cards to make them much better at ray tracing. So to illustrate this, we can go into our graphics options, we can find this ray trace setting, and then we will turn it all on to Ultra, and then we will come back into our game, and moment of truth, what has that done to the frame rate? Not actually that much. We're still looking at around about 80, 85 FPS or so. And once again, I think a lot of this is down to the fact that Cyberpunk has got pretty heavily dependent actually on the CPU. So whilst our frame rate will have gone down slightly, the reason it's not as dramatic as it was before is because we're likely running into a little bit of a CPU bottleneck. It's always a little bit misleading, because if you have a look at our CPU usage at the top left-hand corner of your screen, you can see that that's only around about 65, 70%. And I always get comments from people saying,
Well, if it's not 100%, it's not CPU bound, it's not bottlenecked.
but of course that's not the way that it works, because that would assume that a CPU bottleneck needs to use everything available from all cores. But as we know, that's not actually the case. A lot of it comes down to single core performance. But I thought it was a pretty cool demo actually, that at 1440p, we can still get around about 75 FPS with our ray tracing. And it definitely is quite an obvious difference, because they have all of these, I was going to say wet puddles, but I suppose all puddles are wet. All of these puddles all around the map where you get all of these lovely reflections if you turn the RT on. So it's pretty impressive stuff. Now, I do want to see what happens if we turn this up to 4K. I'll be honest, I'm not expecting it to be as good, but we will turn the FSR down a little bit as well to performance, and then we will make sure we're running at 4K. And then when we come back into the game, is this going to completely break it? No. We have definitely gone down in terms of FPS. Our GPU utilization is around about 98%. But as you can see, we're now getting around about 70 to 80 FPS at 4K on an AMD graphics card. Tell me that is not very impressive. So if you're playing this on like a, well, I was going to say 4K screen, but anything really like a TV where you're using a controller, especially if it's capped at 60 FPS, this is pretty much going to be a perfect experience. How about that? We've come a long way. But ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't satisfied testing just the one RT title. Instead, I wanted to move on and show you something else. So this is actually a really good example because this also has FSR 4 technology. So once again, the image quality is vastly improved versus the FSR 3.1 that it replaces in this title, which is Ratchet and Clank. We actually have this set to 4K as well. So this is 4K with FSR set to performance, but here we're actually using the very high preset, and I have manually changed the ray tracing to be high across the board. And once again, this is a really good example of just how you turn on the RT, and obviously your frame rate is going to drop down. That is just the reality of really intensive settings. But you can clearly see that around about 86 FPS or so, this is still going to give you a fantastic experience. And Carl's always on at me to actually try and play this game from start to finish, and this is going to be a great way to do it, even at 4K with that new FSR 4 technology. But ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to actually get serious and do some multiplayer action as we duck, dodge, dip, dive, and I can't even remember the quote from that film. Dodge. And we're now running this with FSR 4, and this is actually baked into the game, which is pretty cool. We're running this at 4K once again. We've got this set to Ultra, but I have turned the textures up. And as you can see, we're getting around about 100, 120 FPS or so, obviously depending on when and where you are in the title. But let's gear up and actually see if we can play. And you missed me be really bad whilst trying to change some settings, so now we are actually in the gulag, and you can see our frame rate is staying pretty consistent, actually around about 120 FPS or so. It's surprising as well because you used to get a even higher frame rate than this in Warzone, but since they updated this to the latest version, it definitely is a lot harder to run now, so do bear this in mind. So yeah, around about 125, 130 FPS at 4K. It's not the way I would probably play the game. I would at least turn the FSR down to performance personally, or obviously if you're going to play this at 1440p, I'm going to have to spectate now because I've blown it. And interestingly enough, the frame rate has increased, but not by a crazy amount. So I once again think that this may well be down to some CPU bottlenecking, because we're looking at about 140 FPS now, whereas what you'd typically expect with, well, especially when you turn it down to 1440p, would be quite a big dramatic difference. But clearly Warzone is just very, very CPU dependent. So this would be the sort of example when, yes, 9800X3D probably would be worth the extra money, but it's not a small amount, right? You're looking at pretty much at least an extra £100 or dollars, if not a fair bit more, just to get that chip. So you've got to ask yourself whether that extra potentially, what, could be 10, 20, maybe even 30 FPS difference is actually going to be worth it. It's going to depend on the game and the settings and things you're playing, obviously. But yeah, around about 140, 150 FPS, still going to be a great way to play this game, especially if you are playing at 1440p. But I do want to talk about thermals and acoustics. At the moment, our GPU is looking about 57 to 63 degrees or so, and you can see that we're leaving about 15% of the performance on the table by that utilization figure at the top left-hand corner of your screen. And then when it comes to the CPU, we're looking at about 62 degrees. But I think the thing that's most impressive about this is the fact that this system is pretty much silent. So this is a silent room, and I'm now going to not change any mic settings. Ridiculous. You can barely hear it in a silent room, and this is well, supposedly MSRP SKU. Very, very impressive from the kind of do-it-all system. But that, ladies and gentlemen, I think is pretty much everything you need to know about this system. It's not the most out there in terms of aesthetics, but I really like the fact that it's actually a fair bit smaller. Thermals and acoustics was actually very good on this as well. And obviously you can upgrade like those fans to RGB if you want to have something that's a little bit bolder and brighter. You could swap out the case. But I think all things considered, when it comes to aesthetics, performance, value, I think we've done an awesome job here today. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of the system as a whole? What do you make of the graphics cards? That is Editor Carl collecting some GPUs. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this video as well. Get yourself subscribed. And as always, if you do want to check out current pricing, you can find it listed down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Carl, why are you interrupting my videos?